Good morning, good afternoon, good day, whatever time of day it is, wherever you are right now. Thank you for tuning in to the Conversations with Dr. Don show. The show is produced and broadcast from the Portland, Oregon area. For your first-time viewers, Conversations with Dr. Don is an ongoing series of one-hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting people like most of you out there about who they are as unique, one-of-a-kind individuals and about whatever it is we've decided to talk about. And we're going to talk this evening about father and daughter on white privilege. Father and daughter on white privilege. That's going to be interesting because look at me. I'm not white. I'm other.
You're other. Is that what you mark on the?
Yeah, I'm just overloaded with all sorts of anecdotes and stories and histories. Yeah. But I'm interesting because my other research before we got going here tonight suggests that it's going to be interesting because the little I know about you anyhow and your thinking and other things about you, you should have some nice insight because of the things we talked about before we started the show and the books we've done. But anyhow, let me stop talking. I must confess now, some time ago we had some difficulty because my guest for the second show didn't show up. And Ricky, you were here as a guest to learn what was going on here before you started being trained.
Yeah, I just wanted to be a fly on the wall in the control room.
Yeah, and we pressed him into service, and he was a great guest. I said, "Boy, I love you. You're going to be on some more, right?" And boy.
Yeah, this is number 4, isn't it?
Yeah. That's great. All right. So, as you know, the show goes in 2 major parts: the bio part, where we interview my guests about who they are, like education or whatever comes to mind. I got a list of prompting questions. And then the second half of the show, we'll be looking at white privilege. And that's loaded.
It's loaded. And it'll be from our experience, from our point of view. I'll speak to that from my point of view. Growing up when I did. And then Julie and I will comment as my daughter in her experience.
Well, I can't wait.
Yeah.
All right, let's start now. We're going to go with my personal stuff. I was born in New Orleans, Louisiana, of red, white, and black Roman Catholic parentage on December 26, 1928. Today I am a-religious and accepting of all others. I'm a retired PhD clinical psychologist and present-day television broadcast journalist. I'm the 12th of 12 children and married and am the father of 5 daughters by first marriage. Politically, I'm a progressive populist activist, still learning how to live lovingly. A few of my heroes include Jesus, Gandhi, Martin Luther King, and any other fellow human who is currently living lovingly. And Bernie Sanders, I guess I can throw that in. Okay. When and where were you born? We've asked you that before, but this is another show.
Sure, and it fits into what we'll talk about tonight. But yeah, I was born in Sacramento, California. I was born and raised there. And went to UC Berkeley from there before getting into the electronics industry. So I would spend most of my time in California and then got hired by Intel in this very building, as a matter of fact, which always amazes me, in 1994. So Julie was 6 years old then. We moved from California up to Oregon back then.
So, in education, you mentioned your education. How about yours, Julie?
Yeah, so we moved here when I was 6, and I grew up in the Beaverton area, and then went to University of, well, actually, I went to Oregon State first. I went my freshman year to Oregon State, and then I decided I wanted to major in advertising, which was through the School of Journalism and Communication. So I transferred to the University of Oregon, and then about 6 months after I graduated, I moved to New York City, and I lived there for 7 years. I worked in advertising for only about 2 years, and I was about 24, 25, had my quarter life crisis, didn't know what I wanted to do other than not advertising, it turns out. And then eventually when was it, 2014, I started graduate school at Fordham University at the Graduate School of Social Service. So I kind of did a flip-flop and did a completely different thing. And so now I'm a social worker.
Social worker, you're enjoying that?
Yeah, I actually, I never thought I would be a clinician. I never really wanted to be a clinician. I kind of wanted to work in a more macro space, like among the community. I kind of wanted to learn how to create and implement programming specifically for LGBTQ youth. So that was kind of my focus. And then when I moved back, when I graduated from grad school, I wasn't finding a job right away and kind of needed to get working. So my friend who worked for the place that I work for now pretty much told me, whenever you're ready to get a job, you can come be a clinician. So I'm a substance abuse counselor now. And
wow,
it's not what I expected. Yeah.
So who'd you take after, your mom or your dad?
Both. My mom actually, she double majored in criminal justice, right? And social work and bachelor in social work. So, but she also worked in marketing, and after that part of her career, she worked in marketing for a little bit. So we kind of did the same stuff, but backwards. So
reverse order.
Yeah, in reverse order. So it was kind of interesting that it worked out that way.
Why were you born?
I didn't see that coming.
Good. I got one or two.
He asks me that every time.
Oh, man.
I still haven't given him a good answer yet.
He dances.
Wow. Why was I born?
You don't have to answer it. And if I ask you a question you don't want to answer, just say, forget about it. I don't want to answer that.
Yeah.
Forget about it. All right. Wow, it's heavy.
Okay, you don't have an answer for that, huh?
Do
I
it
mean,
with the New York.
Yeah, forget about it.
Forget about it.
I think I was born to figure out why I'm here and then to do that.
Oh.
Whatever that is. I'm guessing this because I felt pretty drawn to social work and giving back and trying to find ways to make a difference. I think when I was applying for grad school, one of the things that really came to mind and that I used in my admissions essay was something that my mom had told me, which was to make sure that you leave this world a better place than when you came into it. And that stuck with me always, and so I used that among a few other quotes that were important to me. So I think that's why.
Are you doing that?
I'm trying. I mean, you could probably ask a couple clients that would say yes, but who knows?
You have a partner, wife, husband, boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever?
I do not.
And so you're single? And your political persuasion, or are you a tree hugger like your dad?
Is he a tree hugger?
No, he keeps trying to bring me into the camp, I guess.
No, your dance is pretty good.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't actually gone out and hugged any trees lately, but I would say that I care pretty deeply about the environment. I have my metal straw. Trying really hard to remember to bring it with me. Yeah.
I haven't gotten that far yet.
Yeah, well, you know, I really need the one that like folds up in the little thing, and then you can bring it on a keychain, and it has its own box. So I need that.
What do you think of cannabis?
It's okay.
Not with what I do. I think that if you
I gotta get my guests on the
Yeah.
spot once or twice, you know. I'm doing CBD regularly,
Oh yeah.
but I can't take the
THC.
THC.
Yeah.
I go bananas. I tried that a couple of times, and this makes me nuts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting
oil
how it
is good.
affects. Yeah, no, and CBD is great. I think that it shouldn't be as regulated as it is, just because I think that there's so much good that it does. So I'm all for it. I think it's a wonderful thing.
So how about memberships in political, social, or civic organizations? Any of those come to mind? I belong to the ACLU and a bunch of other left-wing organizations. And I have guests on. Occasionally I'll get a ringer who professes to be one thing, and then when the cameras are rolling, it turns out he's a plant. He's a right-winger. But it tests me, you know, so, because I got to be nice, right?
Plant.
Wow, that must be a real true test.
It's interesting, yeah, it's fun. Almost 20 years I've been doing this, and
Oh wow.
yeah. So any persons from the past, in your young life or alive today that you look up to or admire? Anybody besides your dad?
Of course, my dad.
Okay, I'll give you the $20.
Yeah, I mean, truly, definitely. I do feel like I'll move on to someone other than my dad after, but I really think that my dad is someone that has been a huge influence in my life in how I approach people and the way that I, especially when it comes to partners, like I learned so much from the way that he treats my mom and the way he is with my mom, and so I feel like that's such an important thing to me because not a lot of people have that. Not a lot of people get that experience where they really learn how you should treat your partner, and I just really feel like I'm a good partner because of my dad. And my mom, of course, but I really learned a lot, you know. I turned out to be gay, so, you know, it's really helpful having someone that teaches me so much.
I'm really experiencing a different thing with you two as my guest because I've never had a father-daughter team as my guest. And then I'm suddenly cheating and looking at you and your face as I'm talking to her and seeing your reaction, and I'm learning something more because this is rather unique, if you know what I mean.
Sure, yeah.
And you're a shrink kind of a person anyhow. You're a people helper or shrink person.
Yeah. I am a shrink person.
I'm a retired psychologist.
Yeah, yeah. I'm a therapist. I'm a substance abuse counselor, so I, work with people every day.
You got some stories about substance abuse clients? Oh,
yeah,
man.
it's crazy out there, and it's amazing. I mean, the lives that people lead, and the one thing that I'm really grateful for in this job that, again, I didn't want to be a clinician, but I'm really glad that I am. It's not, I don't want to continue doing it necessarily, like it's not a lifelong job for me, but I think I have gotten so much out of it just because I have learned things about myself, about other people, honestly, my own prejudices that I had and assumptions that were way wrong and not fair. And I think that they speak to kind of what society as a whole thinks about people that have substance abuse issues and criminal records and all that. And I think we'll probably get into that with some of this stuff, but it's kind of really opened my eyes in ways that I didn't expect. And I am really grateful for that because the people that I work with every day, like so many of them have, are considered felons and have done lots of prison time and are hardened people, but they come from a background that it's like, first of all, you're not really surprised that they ended up where they did. And then to watch them overcome that, they're pretty amazing people.
You've seen some successes in your treatment?
Yeah. I haven't been doing it that long. So, some of the people that are the successes, I think, were successful before they got to me. But then watching them kind of overcome hurdles and things that, life happens, and they're in treatment, and I get to be with them during a very relatively small period in their life. Mm-hmm. And I really admire a lot of them who really struggle every single day, and it reminds me of how lucky I am.
So how long have you been doing this again?
Year and a half.
Year and a half. Mm-hmm. You're going to hang into it for a while?
I think I'm probably going to do it for a short amount of time longer, and then, look for some new opportunities.
Right. Well, I have no more questions to ask you. I think I've used up all of my trick questions, so you're safe tonight.
Oh, that's good, yeah.
You want to ask me a trick question?
I didn't bring any trick ones tonight. I figured we had a full agenda here.
Yeah, we have a full agenda. Yeah. Well, as we were talking before the camera started rolling about this subject, which is kind of touchy a way of putting it, because I'm red, white, and black racially, if I may. To put it generally speaking, there's non-whites and whites. I'm a non-white. And race is a social construct anyhow. Mm-hmm. But it sounds like you've done a little looking and thinking because of your own experiences and your reading. And you got to be so turned on. I've never done such internet work about this subject, even though I are one of them. So let's see where we go from here. But anyhow, you've given me some prompting questions to see where we're coming from. And I'll pose the question, and you guys decide who would address it first, back and forth, or
we
whatever.
may back and forth it because we have different generational experience and different view, different times. So we'll just see how that goes. But we plan to back and forth, I think.
Sure.
And along with with your, it'll just be a discussion.
And I want to offer you a stroke. It took a while for me to appreciate your depth, just generally speaking. And I like you instantly anyhow, but then I admire you and appreciate where you're coming from whenever we talk about anything. Okay?
I appreciate that.
You got it.
Yeah. We have a lot of fun on our discussions. So.
Yeah. And looking for more in the future, I hope.
Yep.
Yeah.
More ideas. Always got ideas.
Yeah. How institutional privilege, discriminatory laws and policies versus subtle racism or other prejudices. An example, when white owners of Major League Baseball made a gentleman's agreement not to include black players. That's an example of institutional privilege?
Now that one is, so there's a comparison here. If you go back to the beginning of the country, the institutional privilege which I was trying to bring out there was the legal aspect in the Constitution, the inclusion of slavery right there, and the laws. Even today, as Julie brought the book, the new Jim Crow, it's not the way it was in the 60s, but it took 100 years after the Civil War where there were just extremely blatant laws, state laws, even federal laws, for discrimination. And as it chipped away at that, it doesn't mean that all of this goes away. So you still have I guess I called it it's probably a bad term, but the subtle condition, which means the prejudice, the racism, and the issues that exist. For instance, we'll talk about this a little later, generational issues as well. But I wanted to talk about this from my particular experience growing up I was a kid in the 50s and 60s. So right in the heat of the civil rights movement, and back then, things were a combination of institutional and they weren't even subtle back then, racism and prejudice. So you had this world, and I grew up in this neighborhood. It was in East Sacramento. It was called River Park, and it was near the Sac State College. But we were really isolated. We had a levee, a train levee on one side of the neighborhood, and then the American River levee on the other side of the neighborhood. So they're only, really one way into the neighborhood. So this was my world as a little kid. And
how about your racial mixture?
The racial mixture had a few Asian families and a few Hispanic families, and no black families were ever successful at living there through the 70s. And I remember a couple of black families did move in, and they were driven out, which is one of them lived up against the river levee, and I remember kids used to laugh about going across over the levee and heaving rocks over onto the house, and they were constantly terrorized by this so-called Leave It to Beaver neighborhood that I grew up in.
In California.
Yeah, and this was in the 60s and early 70s. So, but to me, my world was Leave It to Beaver. It was pretty protected. We'd go anywhere in this neighborhood. Everybody pretty much was white, other than the few Asian families, and it was a very safe place. And you thought this was normal. This was just the way it was everywhere. So in the mid-60s, there was all this hubbub about busing. Busing was a very big issue. And when it was determined that busing was going to happen, then the decision was who's going to get bused and where. And you know, we lived, my family, we lived in a house right across the street from the schoolyard. We didn't want to go bus across town.
Yeah.
And my folks had moved into that house for that very reason, to be close to the school. My mom could watch us during the day.
Sure.
And then the other side of it was, well, we don't want to have a bunch of kids, black kids, being bused into our neighborhood. And there was all this fear and talk of, you know, it was just crazy. But I remember the first day, in 1966, the first day that the busing occurred, and the kids showed up and everybody mixed, and it was not a big deal. And so even back in those times when it was still pretty rough and raw, well, very rough and raw, because the civil rights movement was still trying to knock down, it was like the Voting Rights Act at that time. Mm-hmm. And it's hard to understand for a kid. So for me, there was no privilege. You know, the kids were, when I went to high school, we went to a school that had quite a mix. And so our thought was, or my thought was, well, shoot, these kids are going to the same school I am. They have the same opportunity to take the classes. So the white kids and the Asian kids would take college prep. The black kids and the Hispanic kids would take vocational classes.
Yeah.
And I remember I always wanted to take auto shop in high school, but I couldn't because it was a vocational class.
Okay.
And it was reserved for vocational track students. And I said, well, shoot, why aren't the black kids taking college prep courses? They had the same opportunity as me. So you don't see that as a privilege. We were put in a situation where it was all the same. Well, then you look back and you look at the issues of, number one, generational, and then economic. So to go to college, it costs a bit of money. Even if you stay in town, it's going to cost for tuition, and if you go, like I was planning to do, go away, you know, room and board is a big chunk of money.
Sure.
So they were not prepared to be able to afford that. So why take college prep courses when they get, you know, kids would get set up? But we didn't see it that way. We just saw that this is a bunch of bull. There's no advantage that we have. We're going to the same place. It's not a separate but equal. Everybody's in the same school, and so you have to, you know, you dig in a lot deeper on that. The generational piece of it. White families had an advantage of building up some wealth, and then that wealth would allow them to allow me, my generation, to go to college and take advantage of those things where as another kid wouldn't. And you don't see that. The other thing is free to move around. We could go just about anywhere in the country that we want fairly easily and freely, and you don't see how tough it is for minority people to go to a lot of places
at that time. Were you seeing the pain or the discomfort in black people or people of color as compared to you? Are you aware of any hidden prejudices in you?
Yeah,
because you didn't grow up in Alabama and Mississippi.
Right. No, I never saw that. You know, until the television started showing that. You know, and I firmly believe that it took 100 years to deal with it, because in my little neighborhood, you wouldn't have seen anything. It wouldn't have been something you may have heard of it, but you don't see it, you don't know it, you don't experience it. And it took, I think television was a big part of helping that. People go, I can't believe this is actually really going on. You know, so the technology helped. But in my little world, no, you wouldn't have seen it, because one, you're a little kid, so your world perspective is pretty small anyway. Mm-hmm. Two, living in this little homogeneous neighborhood, you didn't experience anything until you left that neighborhood going in junior high or high school. The prejudices then were the groups would kind of stay together, and we had racial riots in the high school.
Really?
Yeah, I can remember 3 of them when I was in high school, where white kids were systematically attacked. They were planned, and they would happen, and just this melee would occur. And you know, if you're not ready for it and you're not organized, then it was a fight for your life.
Is it more subtle nowadays?
In schools?
Yes.
You know, I honestly don't know. I haven't been exposed to it. It's a good question, because I think that a lot of these prejudices and things, I think that we all have a certain amount of racism, whether we want to admit it or not. And the issue with something like white privilege has a lot of connotation. You're telling me, in one sense, that this exists, and you don't want to accept that. You don't want to acknowledge that. The other thing that can come up, though, on from a white person's point of view is, well, then, if that's really true, and you look at all of this, anything I've done then is almost not legitimate. And because I've had this head start, we don't start from the same starting line.
Mm-hmm.
We start at different places. The only thing you have control of is you can take an attitude that I'm a victim and this is the way it is, and I'm stuck in it, and I'm just going to be in a negative aspect. Or you can take it, well, this is the way it is, and the only thing I can control is how I respond to it and what I can do to help myself, no matter how well, not deprived, but how disadvantaged I am in terms of this other guy whose family are millionaires and going to private schools and know everybody that's in power,
Mm-hmm.
And will work that system. I think there's an awful lot of that. But on the other side, I remember in the movie Rocky III, and he wanted to fight Clubber Lang, and Mick was telling him after he had won the championship that Clubber, he didn't want him to fight him because this guy was just too good. He was afraid he was really going to kill him. And I'm the champion of the world. Well, Mick told him that, well, we protected you. We put fighters that weren't that good, and yeah, you beat them all. Yeah, you did, but you didn't go up against the best. And then Rocky was just, how could this be? Why would you do this to me? And then it's all a sham. So the defensiveness from some white people's point of view is, if they accept or acknowledge that exists, then everything we've done is illegitimate, and that's not true either. They've still had some work, but they did have an advantage in setting it up in one way or another compared to a minority situation. Because once the people in power, that the people and people tend to pull from people like them. And that definitely was what I observed, or when I think back to my younger days, that's just the way it was. And it's even true. It's not just white privilege; it's kind of white male privilege. That's
white male privilege.
White male privilege. Yeah, I'm really going to be in trouble when I walk out of here.
Yeah, that's really scary nowadays because of what's going on now in the electoral process in our country.
Yeah,
and I think that the difficulty with males and their privilege that they've had for ages and ages, and they don't realize that because they're men, they don't have to put up with some of the crap, terrible conditions, like Dr. What's her name?
Dr. Ford.
Dr. Ford.
Yeah.
Lady Ford, yes.
And it's so complicated, I can't get into it right now, so we'll keep going, okay?
Sure.
So what do you think about what your dad just said about privilege and...
Yeah, I mean, I think especially the defensiveness is a really important point, because I think it keeps a lot of people from being willing and able to even engage in any kind of discussion about it. And without any kind of discussion or acknowledgement, obviously, there's not going to be any movement forward. So I think learning how to have conversations that make it accessible for people to acknowledge a certain level of privilege, and then to say, I mean, it's not that makes everything that you've done illegitimate, but it does mean, like you said, that there was a significant advantage. And so, and if it comes down to, you know, a competitive point of view, like, you know, with the Rocky thing, wanting to be the best and thinking you're the best, I would imagine that if that's truly how you feel, you would want a level playing field. You would want equality and equity to kind of be the default, as opposed to one specific group having all the power. Because then if it is about competition, you know you're the best if you're going up and everyone has the same starting line and the same hurdles to cross, and not, you know, people in a disadvantaged place who have all of these extra hurdles that, you know, maybe you start at the same place, but, you know, this person is easily moving forward towards the finish line, whereas the other person has this put in front of them and this put in front of them, and, you know, it makes it a very unfair fight.
And I wasn't really aware of it, and I'm almost 90 now. But in my childhood, and born and raised in New Orleans, and looking back at those times, and just wasn't even, I felt uneasy, like on the buses, for example, and the streetcars, and there was a sign saying, colored sit in the back, and like that, and I just didn't like it, but I didn't appreciate how huge the psychological impact was. And the whites then that were privileged because they didn't have to deal with what I had to deal with. And it was doubly bad for me because as I've gotten older, more of my black shows now. But for many, many years, I passed for white by default, if not nothing else, because I was taken for something other than. So I've experienced that side of thing from both sides.
Yeah.
And in Yokohama, when I was in the occupation, I offended a couple of black truck drivers. And the truck drivers were mostly all black. But at that time, the services were segregated.
Yeah.
And I was taken for a patty lover. Patty was a white person, patty lover. And they got me down in Chinatown in Yokohama and beat the hell out of me. I had a concussion because I had my best friends were white, even though they were in different outfits, because I was in an outfit that's kind of mixed, even at that time. So a few other instances, which I won't go into right now, where I've experienced it from both sides. I was beat up by a bunch of black truck drivers, and I felt awful because I didn't know which way to turn.
Yeah.
Boy, this is really digging deep. So let's keep going because I'm emotionally involved with it right now. Okay. The norm from my perspective, this is Joe, I grew up in a protected environment, your little world, busing in the mid-60s, perspectives on white privilege from my view as a minority. Perspectives on white privilege from your view as a minority.
Versus a minority.
Versus a person.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, I mean, from my experience, there was no advantage. You know, there was just the norm. Mm-hmm. You knew about racism and such, and prejudices, and usually it's because you didn't know people. And in my case, when I went to high school, as I mentioned earlier, it was a pretty mixed group. But the main, you started to meet people. Thing is there was still a kind of a subtle change where the white kids and the Asian kids go into the college prep courses, and then the vocational courses. But sports was where you really got to know folks. Mm-hmm. And you know, when I can remember going to high school, I remember this one kid, I can see him in front of me right now, a black kid. He would just as soon take a swing at me as look at me. Well, he played on, we played on the same high school baseball team, and I got to know him pretty well. And he called me the white boy, and you know it wasn't a derogatory way anymore. It was because we became friends. And this guy, who the first day of school would have just took my head off, just he would have pulled me out of any scrap in any game. And I can remember a time going into second and scuffle started, and he was one of the first guys out there to help me. But you had this common, you get to know people as people, you have a common goal, you start to work together. So it starts to break down your whole idea of a group. You know, you start looking at people at a group. I forgot who said it. It was, I remember seeing the movie Gettysburg, and one of the lines was, if you judge the whole group, you're something to the effect of you're a moron. You got to take people as they come, and it's true. You meet people that are good folks in all situations. But the thing about sports was we had this common goal. Now, when we practiced and we played, we were tight. But then when you go home, you go back to your own neighborhood, and the rest of your life is different. But what sports did was, kind of allows people, in my case, allowed me to get to know individuals as individuals. And I think that was most important turning point for me. But I still had that sense of, well, wait a minute, we're all in the, I didn't really think about it as a 17, 16-year-old kid, where they were coming from. You know, you just said we have this experience in school, everybody has the same opportunity, and all this hubbub about that we don't, that's a bunch of bull. But it really wasn't. It wasn't, because you have to dig deeper in the generational, the economic, the racial prejudice, the psychological. And that's one thing as you mentioned, I've never dealt with that. Now, I can imagine I could walk into some neighborhood where I maybe would experience that. But as a white person in the U.S., there are very few places you can go that you're going to run into that. Now, I do remember, though, thinking I wouldn't go into the backcountry in the South in the 70s as a longer-haired, West Coast white kid. That would be almost as dangerous as going along as a black kid. Yeah. Because you're an outsider. In that case, you're an outsider, and it could be pretty dangerous in those situations. But overall, I've never felt that psychological thing because it's been relative. You want to go somewhere, you go, and I think a lot of time minority people just don't have that. So we haven't had that firsthand experience with the psychological impact that is talked about so much. If you listen to the news today or you look back at the situations that you were talking about, because I'm sure there were a ton of reverse situations where the white soldiers isolated some black soldiers and ganged up on them. But again, a lot of that was due to. Can you imagine the Army integrated in the late 40s, I think it was, and that became so normal with people. It was like sports, working together, but even more so because you live together.
There's a mistake.
Yeah.
That became so normal that normal was so perverted until
yeah, good point. Yeah.
Like nowadays in our government and our system, what's normal is for a huge percentage of the white population to support Kavanaugh, because white is secondary, because what's primary is gender. So gender is more powerful in this situation.
Well, in this one, it's
than race. Yeah.
Well, there's a couple things going on there, but the main thing is gender with this guy, and his his privilege, or his belief of his privilege, his behavior as a young man. Whether you believe her or not, he was doing a lot of things, and but the most recent is all about is all about gender, and that's, like I said, white male entitlement, privilege.
But you can see also, I recently saw a really telling cartoon where it showed a young black man in prison watching TV, and the thought bubble coming out, or the word bubble coming out of the TV, and it was right after all the Kavanaugh stuff came out, and the bubble said, what kind of a society would we have if we allowed something that a kid did to ruin the rest of his life? So you've got this young adult black male in prison. His life is going to be ruined, and he's watching, on TV, people talk about this middle-aged white dude who did some really shady things when he was a teenager, and God forbid we should let it ruin his life, right? So it's a total double standard, and that's all about race. All about race. So
you got to pay your dues?
You gotta pay your dues.
Because of the patriarchal society?
Yeah, well, I think that's
we're changing gears now.
Yeah, I think it's just inclusion of everyone. We're one of the things companies will talk about, and I think is meritocracy. You're trying to. I think companies truly do want to hire the best people so they can be competitive. But there are many things at play there. One of them might be, the dodge is always that there aren't enough qualified people in this area, or we can't find them, we can't uncover them, and there is some that can be a challenge. On the other side of it, meritocracy. What is that? How do you judge that? How do you judge people? We have these silly interviews. Speak to somebody for half an hour, and you're trying to understand if and get the character of this individual, get a sense of their personality and how they will respond and react to a particular job. And a lot of times when hiring occurs, you're trying to fill a slot for somebody to do something fairly quickly, and it's not a real thorough validation of who this person is and what they can do. You've got the paper qualifications, okay, that's great, but it doesn't tell you what kind of person that is, or what they could do to perform. It's hard. It's not an easy thing, but you have to have a way to get candidates in front of the people who are, quote, the decision makers, who, by the way, have their own prejudices and their own view of the world. And I remember I think it was it was the presidential election in 2012, and Samuel Jackson did a piece, and he made a comment that always stuck with me. It was, people tend to vote for people that look like them.
Mm-hmm.
And go, that's true. At first you think, well, that's a racist statement, but everybody tends to go with people like them. I remember another thing that made an impression on me years ago was this whole idea of role models, that there's no person or woman or minority in a position where they can be a role model for others. So I never really appreciated that until one day we were at an air show,
mm-hmm.
and the Blue Angels were the main. They were the pilots were doing the night before the show. They were speaking and mixing with the people.
Yeah.
And I remember this black father and his young son. There was one black pilot in the Blue Angels that year,
mm-hmm.
and they went up to talk to him, and they were just having the best time, and this kid was just mesmerized. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, that's why this is important. It doesn't, not to denigrate any of the other pilots. They're
mm-hmm.
all great,
mm-hmm.
but now this kid can see somebody like him. He has more aspiration. So that's why role models are important. Hollywood roles, not ethnic roles, but non-racial, ethnic roles, just like a mayor of a town. You don't have to play, it's not a black part or a white part. It was just the mayor of the town, and you happen to put a black actor in that. And these role model pieces that help people see that, yeah, I can aspire to this. It's real. It's not something that's false. So these are things that changed my view over the years about acknowledging the fact that you've done things because you've had to work hard at certain things. You did have some advantages, and acknowledging that is important because you didn't do everything on your own. There's a system. There are many people that have helped you along the way. You've had some advantages, and oh, by the way, some of those advantages people don't take advantage of. That others who don't have it would just they'd be thrilled to have that situation and probably could do very well. It's getting hard to get the opportunity. So the level playing field, in the ideal of the U.S. Constitution, unfortunately people always execute these systems, would be to really truly have that equal playing field. And meritocracy is probably easy in sports because and they churn through a lot of people, but winning is the thing. And if players don't win, they're gone. In business, it's not as easy to judge that. And so, and where do most of us work? We're regular people. We're not pro athletes. And the meritocracy that occurs, in some cases, is very easy to judge. In other cases, it's not that easy to judge. So what do? You go with your comfort zone, which what is that usually? Someone more like you.
Meritocracy is one way of considering success and getting along in the world, but beyond that, there's something deeper than meritocracy because there's still this white privilege and prejudice that's working behind the scenes. It's like a dog whistle sort of a message that, for example, the Trump supporters are responding to the message from Trump saying the problems with your life being so poor and you're not doing better off as you grow up than your parents did is because of those immigrants or the black people or the brown people in the world. And this is why we have to put up a wall on the Mexican border to stop non-white people from coming in and contaminating America. I'm so damn political, and I love it. Yeah.
But the systems of, that I used as an example, it wasn't a law, but the owners of Major League Baseball back in the early part of the 20th century, they colluded. They had a gentleman's agreement. Great.
What
term.
about Jackie Robinson
but
those times?
But this was way before that. They excluded the black ball players. They had black ball players in the 1800s. Not a lot. But they did play in the major leagues. And then the owners decided, no, we're reserving this for white players only. And then so the development of the Negro Leagues came along, segregated baseball league. And they couldn't go and stay in the hotels, eat in the restaurants and all of that. Jackie Robinson, Branch Rickey did that on purpose because there was this vast talent that was not being tapped. The best weren't out there. And so it was like the Rocky III situation. You're not playing, you're supposed to be the best in the world, and you're not playing with all the best players because you're excluding a group that would contribute a lot of players to the sport. That was purely prejudice, racial, and a sign of those times. It was. I just couldn't imagine. You look at the Roaring '20s and all of the so-called good times, but it would be rough if you weren't a white person.
It's still a sign of the times, though, because I think in a different way, not related to sports, but from the youngest age, young kids of color aren't given the same opportunities. They just aren't. So when you speak to like meritocracy and specifically, you know, not having enough people of color to apply for certain jobs. Like, you just can't find the people. There's only white people that are able to do this job. Well, from a young age, young people of color are not given the same opportunities. They are, you know, there's actually lots of studies that show that there are, like, starting in kindergarten, when a child misbehaves, and, you know, it's like a 5 or 6 year old child, there's going to be, you know, every once in a while there's going to be some behavioral problems. There have been many instances where they will suspend a kid at that age. If you start your school-age child with those types of experiences, going up through school, you're going to have a very different experience. It's going to be kind of like when you were talking about, you know, the black kid that just wanted to punch you in the face for no reason, right?
Yeah.
But all of these things start at such a young age, and then if that's how you're raised, and you're not given the same opportunities, same, you know, with young women in particular, when it comes to math and sciences and like engineering and all those things, they're just not provided the same opportunities. So it's no surprise then by the time you reach adulthood, you're not going to have the same merits.
I think we're talking about how the system works, how the social system works, how the government system works. And I remember I dropped out of junior high because it just seemed so weird. You know, the red, white, and black racial characteristics in New Orleans because of how it was, Creole we call it.
Yeah.
But the junior high school I went to was, all the students were assigned to automotive and trades.
Yep.
And to go to, he's waving at me, 5 minutes left.
Oh, we got 5, yeah.
To go to a school or college where you could become a lawyer or a doctor like that. There were a few black colleges, just a very few of them, where you could take those kinds of courses and pursue that sort of a goal for yourself. And it just didn't seem right because I didn't think I had the IQ anyhow because of my upbringing. I wasn't smart enough, but I didn't feel okay. I tried a course in bricklaying and masonry and didn't last very long because
wasn't your thing,
wasn't my thing.
Yeah.
But then as I learned, after I got into the military and took the IQ test and like that, and says, hey, I could have go to not just the OC officer candidate school, but even West Point because of high enough IQ. And then as time went by, I thought, what the hell is going on? How come they kept trying to send me into a trade school? Yeah. Mm-hmm. And the society was to limit me because of the color of my skin. So prejudice and how it works and white privilege. So if you're white privilege, then you don't have to deal with that sort of a thing.
You can be anything you want to be.
Yeah.
When you're white, you can be anything you want to be.
Now, with limitation, because there's poverty in that, but,
yes.
So they're going to have there's individuals like that have another challenge. They can move around, but they may have still some limitation. Everybody has their challenge, but it definitely, for me, the acknowledgement of the fact that I'm a white American, I've had some advantages that a lot of others didn't.
You've had some white privileges?
I've had them, yeah.
You're a white person too.
Yep, I too have had them. Yeah.
She took advantage of mine.
Absolutely, absolutely, I did, and I think it wasn't really until living in New York City and being completely immersed in a place where I was the minority a lot of times, because I mean, I didn't have much money. When I first started working, it was tough. And so I lived in, areas where I was surrounded by people of color and low socioeconomic status, and, which is the opposite of what I grew up in, middle class, you know, suburban, mostly white neighborhood. So it was an eye-opening experience, and then I went to grad school.
Well, I think the time has run out for us, so let's close by looking at the camera and give us your final thoughts or words about what went on here this evening, or about white privilege. Take a minute or so just to tell the viewers what you're thinking.
Okay.
You go.
I would say that I think it's really important to be willing to be uncomfortable. When it comes to white privilege, I know that it's a really defensive word, and I think it's okay to be uncomfortable, and actually we should be uncomfortable. I think anyone who is white, identifies as white, needs to understand that that is the first step of many when it comes to righting all of the wrongs that we have. And there are many wrongs, and there are ways to fix it, but we have to be willing to kind of let go a little bit.
Shall we give you that a turn?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, go for it.
Sure. Yeah, I guess just being honest. You have to be honest, and it's like any issue or problem. First thing you have to do is acknowledge that something exists, and then not to be. You don't have to be ashamed of who you are. I'm not ashamed of who I am. I'm not ashamed of what I've done, but I think that there's more that can be done, and I have to acknowledge the fact that people have helped me along the way, and where I was born, I did have advantages that a lot of people in the U.S. don't. So the conversation is very important, an honest, open conversation. To me, it exists no matter what others might want to deny.
Thank you. Okay, so we're gonna start closing shop here because thanks for watching. Time has slipped by so fast. And not Kentucky Fried Chicken, Dr. Don's KFC. Be kind, be friendly, and be charitable to you too, and you too, and you too. And time flew by really quickly.
It did, didn't it?
Okay, we'll see you next time.